something your family always did on specific dates that had nothing to do with holidays? Growing up, we lived in this little neighborhood on the outskirts of town, and literally every single month on the 5th, no matter what, my entire family would go visit our elderly neighbor Ralph. Rain, snow, school night, whatever. The 5th was always Ralph Day, as my parents called it. It wasn't like a quick stop by either. We'd spend the entire evening there from like 6 p.m. until sometimes 10 or 11 at night. My mom would always cook something special to bring over, usually some kind of casserole or pasta dish. My dad would bring a bottle of whiskey, and me and my sister Vera would have to put on nice clothes, which basically meant not wearing ripped jeans or band t-shirts. I remember being like 8 or 9 and absolutely hating Ralph Days because his house smelled like mothballs, an old person, and he didn't have cable, so we'd just sit there bored out of our minds while the adults talked for hours. He had this ancient TV with rabbit ears and like 3 channels that mostly showed static. And the worst part was we couldn't even complain about it because mom and dad would get super mad if we acted like we didn't want to be there. The weird thing was, Ralph wasn't even related to us. He wasn't some long-lost uncle or family friend from way back. At least that's what my parents always said whenever I asked. They'd just be like, Ralph is a very important person, and change the subject. And it's not like Ralph was super friendly either. He was this grumpy old man who barely acknowledged us kids except to complain about how tall we were getting or how loud we were being. As I got older, like 13, 14, I started noticing things. Like how my normally chill dad would get super stressed the day before Ralph Day. How my mom would spend extra time cooking something special, even though Ralph barely seemed to eat it. How they'd sometimes argue in hushed voices before we went over. And how they never skipped a month. Even when I had a high fever once, my parents still went without me. When I was 16, I started refusing to go sometimes. I'd make up excuses about homework or not feeling well. My parents would get furious. Like way more upset than made sense for just missing a visit to some random old neighbor. Fast forward to last month. I'm 24 now, living about an hour away from my hometown. I hadn't been to a Ralph Day in years, though my parents still go religiously. I got a call from my mom saying Ralph had passed away and the funeral was on Saturday. She sounded relieved, not sad exactly, which struck me as odd considering how important these visits had been. At the funeral, there were barely any people there. Just my family, a couple other elderly neighbors, and this guy named Dominic who introduced himself as Ralph's nephew from out of state. During the reception afterward, which was at Ralph's house, now all cleaned up and smelling like pine cleaner instead of mothballs, I ended up talking to Dominic. I casually mentioned our monthly visits, expecting him to know all about them, but he looked confused and said Ralph never mentioned having regular visitors. This struck me as super weird. How could our years of monthly visits never come up in conversation with his nephew? When Dominic went to get more coffee, I noticed a door to what must have been Ralph's study was open. I'd never been allowed in there as a kid. It was always locked during our visits. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slipped inside. The room was small with bookshelves and an old desk, but what caught my eye was a calendar on the wall. It was open to the current month but had these weird markings on it. The 5th of the month had a red circle around it with 500 written inside. I flipped back through previous months and saw the same thing. Every 5th, circled in red with 500 written in. I was standing there trying to process this when I felt someone behind me. It was my dad, looking pale and furious. He grabbed my arm and hissed, "What the hell are you doing in here?" before practically dragging me out. In the car on the way home, I confronted my parents. The tension was unbearable. My dad gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. My mom staring out the window, refusing to look at me. I demanded to know what the calendar meant, why we'd spent my entire childhood visiting this man, what the money was for. Finally, my mom broke. She started crying and told me everything. Turns out, 25 years ago before I was born, my dad had been driving home from a bar. He wasn't drunk, according to my mom, but he'd had a few beers. It was raining, dark, and he hit someone. It was Ralph's wife, Betsy. She died instantly. My dad panicked and was about to drive away when Ralph came running out of their house, having heard the impact. Instead of calling the police, Ralph made my dad an offer. He wouldn't report the hit and run if my dad paid him $500 every month for the rest of his life, and the family had to come visit on the 5th of every month, the day Betsy died, so Ralph wouldn't be alone on that day.